I'm Joe Nocera. I am a columnist at Bloomberg Opinion, and like most everybody in the world of columnizing, I have been focusing on the crisis that we are currently facing with this pandemic. And a lot of my work and a lot of what we're going to talk about in the next 25 minutes is the federal response and the sort of business dynamics behind a number of the issues that we're facing. I have two esteemed panelists. I guess we call them panelists, although we're not really a panel, are we? No, we don't have panels anymore. The first is Lisa Latanza from Yale, who's a big shot in orthopedics, and right? Aren't you a big shot? And
sure.
And I don't see Eric yet. We'll talk to him as soon as he gets on. But I was told that I think this would be a good place to start. That one of the things that you've been grappling with over the past couple of months is supply chain issues and how you get the stuff from there to here, how it got there in the first place. Why doesn't America manufacture enough of it ourselves now? So why don't you start by just telling us what your difficulties have been, what your issues have been, trying to get the supplies that you need?
Yeah, the main issue is that the global supply chain is broken. So the way we normally get equipment into the hospital through medical supply companies, where we know we place an order and the things that we order are going to come in, that's not happening anymore, and it hasn't happened for weeks or months, despite many hospitals being proactive and seeing what was happening in China and ordering things in advance. There just wasn't any PPE to be had by that time. Some of it has to do with politics, some of it has to do with corporate greed, but we can no longer reliably get masks, isolation gowns, surgical PPE in through our normal supply chains. And so how I got involved with this, I'm chair of orthopedic surgery. I have nothing to do with PPE on a regular basis, but it became clear that we needed to fill our pipeline in different ways by working with local manufacturing and some of these sources that are not normal sources for obtaining PPE. The problem with that is there's a lot of counterfeit out there. There's a lot of masks from China that don't do what an N95 is supposed to do. And we've actually had to develop a testing facility at Yale so we could tell if we were putting safe masks on our providers.
That's pretty unbelievable. Why? Oh, look who's here. So we have our other special guest, Eric Toner, and he is a big shot at the Bloomberg School of Medicine at Johns Hopkins. So he's funded in somewhat the same way I'm funded, I guess, as a Bloomberg columnist. That's probably not quite right. But Eric, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is the federal response, not just in terms of masks and PPE, although that's certainly important, but in terms of testing and mobilizing the country and getting people behind social distancing and all the various ways that you would expect the federal government to lead. And it appears that it hasn't. I don't know where that echo comes from. So would you speak? I'm told that one of the things that you've been doing is kind of grappling with this issue too, and I was wondering if you could speak to it.
Sure. Well, it really is unfortunate. My colleagues and I have worked for decades on healthcare preparedness for pandemics, and specifically for severe pandemics. And there have been thousands of pages of plans written, and hundreds, if not thousands, of people involved in these efforts. And it really is disheartening to see the level of dysfunction that has occurred now that it's game time. And so I don't know what more we can say about that, but it's not like people didn't anticipate this was going to happen. A lot of work has gone into thinking this through in the past. But I do have to say, specifically with regards to PPE, there has been for years federal inaction on this issue. We have known for a very long time that the medical supply chain is broken. We see it on a daily basis with shortages of all kinds of drugs and medical supplies. We have known for a long time that a lot of these materials are sourced from either a single manufacturer or just a few manufacturers, many of which are overseas. And so we have failed in our opportunity to fix this problem, in part because the federal government does not have the authority, has not had the authority doesn't have the levers to do what it needs to do, but it also doesn't even have visibility on a lot of these things. It doesn't have situational awareness with regards to masks and PPE. Maybe it does now, I don't know, but it has not. And so, there were opportunities to fix this before. Hopefully now, when this is over, we will have the capabilities we need.
So you've both used the phrase, the supply chain is broken, the medical supply chain is broken. And Eric, you specifically said, it was obvious that it was broken before the pandemic hit us. Lisa, would you agree with that? And is there some way you can illustrate what was wrong with the supply chain pre-coronavirus? I mean, was it just that it was offshored, or is it something deeper than that?
Well, I think all of the things that have been illustrated previously is you can't have this equipment coming from one place. You can't be relying on equipment coming from overseas that you don't have control. And, a single president or a single administration's trade policies can impact your ability to get these things. But all of these things, the majority of these things being made offshore creates the problem. And that's exacerbated by the regulations and the administrations. None of this should be political. In my estimation, the way to resolve some of these problems in healthcare and these types of crises is doctors, nurses, healthcare workers should be in charge of what happens when there's a pandemic, not politicians, not administrators, but the people that actually know how to take care of these problems. So, this goes much deeper than running out of masks. The masks just put a light on all of the things that are wrong with the healthcare system today and with politics today.
Eric, I see you're nodding your head. I wanted to ask you, you're right, of course, there have been pandemic groups within the government, pandemic task force, and pandemic white papers. Was there a step-by-step guide to what the government should do if there's a pandemic, and what would those steps be? Could you tell us a little bit about that, given how little of this we've seen?
Sure, there was. There was a very detailed pandemic plan that was created, first created back in about 2007 or so. It's where the whole strategy for social distancing came from. It was very detailed. It was developed when we were so concerned about the bird flu, the H5N1 avian flu. And then I think after the 2009 pandemic, which turned out to be the mildest pandemic that we know of in history, I think a lot of the enthusiasm for that pandemic planning sort of ebbed. And, these plans most of them were not needed during that pandemic. And so I think a lot of the momentum was lost after 2009. But there is a very detailed plan still that CDC and others at HHS developed, and pieces of that have been put in place. But there's also been a lot of improvising that's been done that's not consistent with those plans.
Do you think the plan, if it had been put in place, would have been a difference maker, a game changer?
It's hard to know because of there were a lot of technical problems, specifically with regards to the testing, and the 2 months that we lost with tests that didn't work, have put us behind the 8 ball in a way that it's really hard to judge everything else because of our lack of testing that we're still suffering from.
Given that, Lisa, where do you think we should be now? What should we be doing now? What should the federal government be doing, and what should the community of epidemiologists and other scientists who are focused on this issue? I mean, we are behind the 8 ball. We have been. Are we catching up, or are we going to always be behind the 8 ball? Is there a place we can get to that would be better?
There's definitely a place that we can get to that would be better, but it's going to take a national effort to get us there. And right now, until we are no longer dependent on these things coming from overseas, all of this will remain unpredictable. From what I've seen, what needs to happen is all of our efforts need to play out with getting manufacturers in the United States to be able to produce these things reliably and in large quantities, because we can't impact what's happening overseas. The only thing that we can impact is what's happening here. And although there have been Herculean efforts so far by communities and local manufacturers to help with the mask shortage, nobody has been able to come up with an N95 mask that's equivalent to a 3M mask that's been produced in this country. In all of the testing that we've done, there's a few others overseas where the fabrics work, but they're not of the right shape or form to act like an N95. And without an N95, we're defenseless. So to me, all the time, money, and effort right now needs to go into coming up with people in this country that can mass produce these immediately.
Do you know if that's happening?
To my knowledge, it's not happening.
So you have all these companies out there scrambling to make ventilators, which we may or may not need down the line.
Right.
But nobody's making the thing that would be most useful in the here and now.
If you have the N95s, you don't need the ventilators. That's the issue. For lack of a 75-cent piece of equipment, we're losing lives and putting more lives at risk with our doctors, nurses, frontline healthcare workers, has been said before, our janitorial staff, everybody that's in the hospitals working. And this is real. And part of the problem is it's not real to people who are not facing this every single day. The people that are running out to beaches today because it's a nice day, it's not real enough for them. And it has to get very real very fast. One of the problems is this material that N95s are made out of is a very specific type of material. And, what I think needs to happen is the formula for that needs to be given up. And whoever can produce that the way that 3M does, this is a crisis that needs to happen. And then whoever can manufacture these, they need to be manufacturing them tomorrow. This is no longer about profiteering and who can make and sell the masks at the highest price, but that's what's happening all the time. I purchased masks this week that are 75 cents per mask that are being sold for $5.50, $6 on the market. And we have to pay it because it's that or not have the masks.
Who's selling them?
China? Honestly, it's not happening in China. There's intermediaries that are getting involved now, middlemen that are marking up the prices to bring them into the United States and resell them. There are, rumors out there that hedge funds and those kinds of entities are buying up masks in great quantities, but they don't have anywhere to sell them, so they're just sitting. There's all kinds of things that are happening in the background that impact the ability to get these masks.
Wow. We're going to have to talk later about this, Lisa. I smell a column. Eric, could you talk a little bit about testing? You mentioned that we were 2 months behind. Of course we were. The CDC, botched its first round of tests before they opened it up to others to devise testing. It appears that we have some antibody tests now. I don't know how good they are, or how reliable, I should say. And we obviously are now testing in the range of, I've seen 300,000 a day. of the coronavirus tests, but I'm told that that's not nearly enough, really, to begin thinking about reopening, the economy, which of course really has to happen at some point.
Sure.
So could you talk a little bit about where we are on that and what we need to do to catch up on that?
Yeah, we still are way behind what we need in terms of testing. Different people have come up with different estimates, but certainly we need the capability to do millions of tests every day. What we need the test for is so that we can identify essentially everybody who's infected and be able to track them. We can't safely open up the country again to do what's happening in half the country right now, unfortunately, until the number of cases are down to a manageable level. And by manageable level, we mean we can identify quickly people who are sick. We can trace their contacts. We can have those people quarantine appropriately, have everybody who's sick quarantine appropriately, have the healthcare system be able to take care of people who are sick, which means that we have to stop using our surgeons in our operating rooms as ICUs, and we have the PPE that we need to protect the healthcare workers. There's a whole series of things that need to happen before we can safely say, sure, everybody can go back to life as it used to be. But the key to all of that, first, PPE certainly is a key, but another key is we have to have really ubiquitous testing. We have to be able to test anybody who is sick or anybody who's been exposed to somebody who is sick. And it takes a heck of a lot, and we're not there yet, and we won't be there for a while.
But do you think we're getting there? In other words, are there other companies and others who are ratcheting up their ability to test?
Yes, we're much better than we were, and new tests capacity is increasing. New tests are coming online, and these tests, these diagnostic tests for when you are sick, these PCR tests are pretty good, and some of them are faster than others. We really need to be able to get the results within hours rather than days, but they're pretty good, and I think it will continue to get gradually better.
Let me ask you one other question. What is the story? Could you talk for a second about antibody tests, which I know 6 weeks or so ago people were thinking about it as some kind of silver bullet. Obviously, it's not, and there's a lot of talk about how reliable they are or not, and what their utility is going to be. Could you just talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, they're basically two categories of these antibody tests. Those that have been somewhat reviewed by the FDA and given provisional emergency use authorization, and those that have had no review at all by the FDA. But the FDA has said anybody, any company can do their own review and start selling these tests in the United States. And so there are many of these tests that don't seem to work very well at all. Some appear to work okay. What these tests can do, if they work, is they can tell you if you've been previously infected. They don't tell you if you're infected now, because it takes a while to develop those antibodies, but they'll tell you if you've had a past infection. And if you've had a past infection, that'll help people like me understand the outbreak much better, but also give you some indication of whether or not you're likely to be reinfected in the near future. What we don't know, and what I fear a lot of people are misunderstanding, is these aren't guarantees of immunity. And we don't yet know the level of antibodies that are necessary for immunity, and we won't know that for a while yet.
I wanted to ask both of you, Lisa, you first, how full is your hospital? One of the things I keep hearing is that outside of the hot spots like New York, Detroit, New Orleans, and a couple of other places, to a surprising degree, the hospitals are not filled with COVID patients, or anyone else for that matter, because people are scared to go to a hospital because they're afraid they're going to get it.
So I can tell you that that's not true in New Haven. At Yale, up until about 3 days ago, we had 460 COVID positive patients in our hospital. More than 70 of those on ventilators, more than 100 in the ICU. So these are very high acuity patients that require a very high level of care. And we burn through PPE, even with the reuse, we burn through PPE very quickly because, you know, the doctors and nurses that are on the front line taking care of them have to be in and out of these rooms. And we've done everything we can to conserve. And despite the fact that conserving and reusing has never before in the history of the CDC been recommended as an okay thing to do. But yeah, there are lots of hospitals and lots of smaller hospitals that maybe don't have very high numbers, but because of the acuity of these patients, they're still, you know, falling under the crushing weight of taking care of these really critically ill patients. With social distancing and things like that, and the things that were put in place in Connecticut very early on, we didn't reach the numbers that were predicted in our hospital, but it has still been an enormous load for our frontline providers to be taking care of this number of critically ill patients.
I believe that our panel is drawing to an end. This has been really illuminating and really helpful. And I believe Steve Clemens is ready to take over. So I want to pass the baton to him. Steve, are you there?
Sure.
Steve?
I think I'm here. Hello, I'm here.
All right. Ball's in your court, buddy. Thank you very much. Lisa, thank you very much. Eric, it was really, really illuminating. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.